doesn't really care about the papers that the journal publish. Their goal is to make money, right? So, and this is where you see predatory journals harassing authors, researchers, asking to submit papers, and they promise, fast peer review in exchange of money, right? So you'd have to pay $100, $200, $1,000 to get your paper published in a quick way, right? So this is a distinction. In orange, the number of predatory journals; in grayish, the number of reliable journals. What we notice is that the number of reliable journals is relatively, the trend is not that high, but starting early 2000, 2001, 2002, that's basically where people started to get internet. We have a boom of predatory journals. In 2018, The Economist, they extrapolated from a random sample of 4,800 journals, and they estimate that about half, right, slightly below half the number of journals we had in 2018 is considered as predatory. And we see some differences in terms of fields as well. So this is in thousands. In health, about 6,000 journals that are considered as reliable, but then 4,400 considered as predatory. So this is something that you need to keep in mind, where journals, they I would say they know about the publishing system. They know that researchers, they have to publish. Even worse now, research institutions, they use publication data to do research management, research evaluation. As it was mentioned in the introduction, publication is an important element for rankings. And not all researchers are fully aware of where shall I publish, good quality journals that don't have questionable practices. So this is, of course, something that represents a waste of research resources. There's something else that you might be aware of. It's called index hijacking, right? So the way it works, and this is an article relatively recent, May 2023, 9th of May. So it was published October 2023. So 1-year-old paper that talk about index jacking. So the way this works is that some journals manage to get into databases, right? So this one is studying the hijacked journals in Scopus. So that obviously represents a challenge to scientific integrity, because that legitimizes unreliable papers that have not undergone peer review. So we know peer review is really important. Before publishing a paper, it has to go through peer review. It has to be evaluated by experts in your field, so that we rely, we have data, we have findings that we can rely on, right? Those papers, the problem is that those papers, they might be cited, right? And these unauthorized content can be retrieved in other databases like ORCID, for example, or even worse, in some fields. Someone was telling me this last week, where in, for example, clinical medicine or in pharmacology, you might have studies that present some results, but those results you cannot rely on. And even worse, that has some impacts on health of patients, or patients that take some treatments that have no real effect. So this goes beyond the publishing industry or the sharing scientific research and results that might have impacts on the society. There is another problem that we've seen. So you could have a look at this report, relatively recent. It's related to multi-affiliation. So, and this is mentioned as a growing problem of scientific integrity. In the past decade, what we've seen substantial increase in the number of affiliations listed by authors, right? When you write a paper, typically the way it works, very simple, you have at least one author, and that author has at least one affiliation. That's where the researcher works, right? But it's not uncommon to see researchers with multiple affiliations. That's my case. For example, I work at Clarivate, so that's my affiliation, but I do research at Leiden University, so I have two affiliations. My primary research affiliation is the university. But what we've seen is that the number of affiliations is booming by individual authors. So sometimes you see basic search in databases. Some authors, they have now more than 20 or more than 30 affiliations. The problem that we see here is that when you try to measure the output by institution or even by country, this phenomenon is raising concerns or issues regarding the genuine scientific contribution of these authors make at each institution, right? So how do you decide if this paper or the work that you've done when you publish, when you submitted this manuscript or paper, you have to decide if was it a work done in this specific institution? Maybe you've used some resources, maybe it's your main employer. This is the institution that pays your salary, or you've been there physically. So these are the type of questions that you have to ask yourself. In the same report, this is something that I recommend you have a look at. This report is really interesting. And unfortunately, we see some like strong cases. So this chart looks at 50 countries with the highest scientific production in the Web of Science between 2008 and 2020. So we have 50 countries represented here. Two axes. The x-axis is the number of the percentage of international multi-affiliation. So that's a percentage. And it's compared to the percentage of intranational multi-affiliation. Intranational and international. And we see some extremes here. For example, Saudi Arabia, Egypt. So two countries from the region where the percentage of international affiliations in their papers is much, much higher than the intranational, meaning the domestic affiliations. Moving to the left, so this is the highest, so I would say the extreme cases. To the left, we have Singapore, South Africa, and then we have Sweden, but focusing on the countries of the region. So we have Tunisia here. Again, this is focusing on the top 50 countries in terms of number of publications in the Web of Science. So the conclusion here is that certain countries have experienced an abnormal surge in international multi-affiliation authorship. And the question that is being raised here is really the question about the actual scientific contribution made by these authors or by these institutions, and also the importance of trying to protect the integrity of scientific output. On the other hand, we see like where the international percentage is equal to the international percentage of affiliation. So that's basically, so this is 5 against 2. So, right, so that would be an axis or a curve like this, right? Where y is equal to x or higher if you have more international than international. So you need to look at this curve and see and compare these two proportions. So I just want to focus here a little bit, just give some a few points about some of the solutions that we have and that you might have access to in your institution, you might be aware of. So at Clarivate, we have a group focusing on what we call research and analytics. So these are research and analytics solutions, a very well-known platform, the Web of Science, mainly used for research and discovery. But this data is also used, as it was mentioned in the introduction, for ranking purposes, right? So you take the data and you can start ranking entities. So institutions, even departments, researchers, journals, countries, and so on. So that's what we do in journal status reports. We provide journal intelligence, essential science indicators, data at the author, journal, and country level, insights, benchmark analytics, data mainly used for research evaluation, research management, research strategy, again at different levels, author, institution, department, journal, funding agency, and so on. I'm not going through all the platforms here, but what I want to mention is that whatever the analysis you conduct, the importance of the data, or the data has a high importance. So you always go back to the data set that you've used to do your analysis. That's what we do in research. You mentioned the data that you use to do your work, and the same with the methods. So my point here is that you need data that you can trust to do those different analysis. In Clarivate, for your information, we have under what we call research excellence, three main pillars or themes. One is the research integrity, right? So we need trust. So we need data that we can trust. The way we respond to this is, if you look at the database, we speak about content that you can trust. So we focus on high quality journals. So that's why we have a journal selection process. And then we have the research effectiveness. So something that we've seen also, there is a boom in terms of content. So it's easier now to publish compared to the 70s, 60s, where it was much more difficult to publish a paper because you didn't have the same access in terms of resources. It was more difficult to write, less journals to publish. You needed to spend months in the library to find a single relevant paper. Now it's much easier. So the way we respond to this is that we provide personalized user experience, different content types, and also workflows to reduce friction. And then the research impact. So I think maybe something that might be of interest today is how you assess or evaluate research output that drive innovation. So that's one element. I can speak about hot papers, highly cited papers. So this what we call top papers. But then there's also the impact that your work can have on society. So these are different elements, different practices that you can have to evaluate the research impact in many different ways, not just focusing on citations, for example, right? So these are best practices that we provide, but also different measures that that can help you get a more comprehensive view of what research impact means exactly. So again, back to the content, something that we provide is content, data, and metrics that you can trust. You'll see this more and more often, where you have fraud, research fraud, you have issues with research integrity in terms of journals, that publish papers that you can't really trust. And I'm sure you've seen that already. I could show you my mailbox. I receive lots of emails from journal editors, publishers, sometimes in fields that I'm not even active in. And they make some huge promises of publishing quite quickly. So again, I recommend you stay away from those journals. And in the region, we have to raise awareness. So we have to train our researchers in the Arab countries, but the issue is the same in any region, any country, in any emerging region, where predatory journals, they really play that game. I have so many cases of people coming to me and say, okay, I submitted this paper to this journal and they accepted it, and now they ask me to pay $600. $600 for a researcher in many countries of the region is huge. It's sometimes higher than his or her salary. So one way to avoid such journals is to look, especially when you're not familiar with the publishing industry. When you have experience, the question is different. But one good starting point, so that's one advice, is to look at journals that have been evaluated. So in the Web of Science, we have what we call the master journal list. So it's a list of journals that have been selected. So these are journals that you can that you know that they have been evaluated by our editors. There are many other services that provide, an evaluation of such journals, and as a result, when you have a database that you can trust, then we build a structured database, right? So you have authors, addresses, funding information, abstract, and so on. And this is data that's what we call indexing. So we take that data from these journals, we put them in a database, and that represents what I call here a reliable data foundation to do your own analysis. I've mentioned ISI. ISI is the original institute that produced the Web of Science, the Science Citation Index. It still exists, and this is the group of experts that provide metrics that you can trust. But it's very simple. Once you have databases, you can create metrics. You can create lots of indicators, but we know those indicators, they might not be easy to interpret. They might be like, black boxes, and you can't really trust them because you don't know how they're calculated and what they mean exactly. So this is also something that we provide. So I just want to speak about the Web of Science core collection because that's the source of data that you can rely on. As a reminder, the collection is based on journals, conference proceedings, and books. It's multidisciplinary, so science, social science, arts, humanities. It goes through 254 subject categories, and we have about 22,000 high-quality journals that you can explore in that database. I'm not going through all the statistics on the right-hand side, but we curate, clean, slice this data. For example, an important work that we've done in many countries of the region, for example, in Tunisia, but also in Morocco, in Saudi Arabia, in many countries of the region where we went and cleaned to clean the addresses, right? So that's what we mean by disambiguated organizations. Let me give you an example. So you take a paper, an author, the country, it shows Tunisia, and then it shows the address as Univ, Tunis, El Manar, for example. And then you have another author from the same institution, but the address is written differently. What we do is we unify those addresses, we clean them so that perhaps someone from Tunisia, the ministry, wants to know about the output of Tunisia, or someone from, I don't know, Scientific Research Council of University of Tunis Al Manar, from another institution, wants to know the output of that that specific or that particular institution. So that's really important at the institutional level. And we also started doing that at the department level. For example, some authors would mention that they're affiliated to Department of Chemistry, right? Or Department of Physics or Department of Mathematics. So we started doing that as well in the database. I've done a study. I mean, you can look it up. It's going through. It's going to be published very soon, but the preprint is available there. I want to talk about the funding information. So that's also data that is very important. You take, let's say, a scientific research council who is interested in doing some analysis at the funding level. They want to know about who is funding this research. So we have this data available in the platform, right? Where we take the funding acknowledgement. So typically, let's say a researcher from Morocco would say, I would like to thank CNRST for giving me some money, or someone from Riyadh, King Saud University, saying, I would like to thank the Deanship of Research, or I want to thank KAUST, or I want to thank the ministry. So we would take this data and say, okay, this researcher received a grant with the grant details, and we put that in the database so you can do different analysis, always based on published information. So this is data that you can trust. You do have access to a chat, so if there's any questions, any comment, or if I'm going too fast, let me know. I'm happy to clarify any point. I'll make sure that we have enough time towards the end of the session to take any questions. So feel free to ask your questions in the chat. Okay. Yeah, I've just seen a message in the chat. Can someone confirm that the sound is good? There were two messages about the sound. Is the sound good enough? Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you for the confirmation.
Please, if you can raise your voice more, it is better. Sometimes it's clear, sometimes not clear.
All right. Okay. Okay. All right. So let's move on. Some of you might be involved in journals. You might work as a journal editor, and you might be interested in having your journal indexed in the Web of Science. So we have journal selection process that is public. You can look it up, Clarivate journal selection process. I'm not going through all the details. That could be another full hour session to speak about the criteria that we look at when we want to index a journal. So first of all, I just want to clarify, Clarivate is not a publisher. So the journals that you find in the Web of Science are not published by Clarivate. So that's the first point. The way we get the data, the publishers or the journal editors, they submit the journals for indexation in the platform. And then our team of experts, they only do that every day, 9 to 5. They analyze these journals. And you'll see that it's quite strict. It's the most strict selection process. We look at 28 points of evaluation. So there's an initial triage. Of course, the journal needs to have an ISSN, a journal title, journal publisher. It has to be available online for online journals. We need to have access to the content. The journal needs to be peer-reviewed, and we need the contact details of the editors, right? Someone who's managing the journal. You would be surprised, many journals, they fail in this first triage because they don't have an ISSN, for example, or they can't justify that the journal is peer-reviewed. And then there is an editorial triage and then an editorial evaluation, which is different. The editorial triage will look at, and then we have, so if you count here, we have 28 points of evaluation, 24 related to quality, and 4 related to impact. Based on the outcome, right? If the journal fails the initial triage, then it is unsuccessful, and we ask the journal editors, you can resubmit when you fix the issues, right? If it's successful, then we start the editorial triage, and so on, right? So this is how it works. Step 1, successful or unsuccessful, and then editorial triage, the successful outcome or the unsuccessful outcome, and so on. The important point that I want to raise here is that in the database, we have something called emerging source citation index, where it is an emerging journal in the sense that it's still new. So obviously it wouldn't have big impact yet, big influence or high reputation, because it's still new. But if it's good enough in terms of quality, then it will be indexed in what we call ESCI or ESCI, Emerging Source Citation Index. And it is evaluated for impact. If the impact is high enough compared to peer journals, then it gets into either Science Citation Index expanded, Social Science Citation Index, or Arts and Humanities, depending on the field, right? So very important here, and you can have a look at that. I'll share the presentation later on. But for example, we need the affiliation details, right? Because that's how we build the database. We need the affiliation of the authors, the affiliation of the editors. The journal needs to publish on time, meaning it has to respect its frequency of publication. Okay. People think that, yeah, it's only journals in English. That's wrong. We have journals from the region published in Arabic being indexed in the database, but we need at least the title and abstract in English and the references in Roman script. But the full text can be in any language. You'll find journals in Turkish, you'll find journals in French, German, Chinese, Arabic, as I mentioned earlier, but at least title and abstract, simply because it's easier to make your content discoverable. People can search for it and find it, and they would find the relevant publications, right? So and then some data related to peer review, grants, and so on. So for your information, less than 20% of submitted journals pass the 24 quality criteria, right? So that gives you an indication of the quality of content that you find in the database. So the importance of data, I want to mention something that I mentioned earlier already. I talked about the authors and affiliations, but the indexation cover to cover. So we index all the content from the journal and the cited references, because that's what we need to count the citations, to know who's citing who, and have all this information. Something that I want to show you here, I mentioned an example earlier. I talked about University Tunis and Manar, for example. So we have done that exercise for more than 18,000 institutions. It's not perfect. This is a work that we do with colleagues on the ground, people like you, people who want to improve the visibility of their institution. And by the way, this is also the data that is used in several global rankings. But here you see some examples of, it's the same university, right? But the addresses are written differently in the publications, right? So so that's an example. I talked about the funding acknowledgement, and this is an analysis you could do. So this is focusing on Spain, for example, who's funding research from Spain. So Spanish government, but then you see other provinces or institutions or funding agencies or funders contributing to the research. So we get that from the funding text. So if you see, that is coming from the paper, and where they give the grant details and the funder details. But then you also have data coming from Medline. Medline provides funding information, or ResearchFish. These are other databases where we get the content. Lots of information. I'm not going through all of that, but all author names, the details of the journal, impact factor of the journal, funders captured since 2008. You have the research area. So you could say this paper, this publication is in a clinical and life sciences, but it is also talking about inflammatory processes, and it's contributing to society from a United Nations perspective, because it contributes to good health and well-being, which is United Nations Sustainable Development Goal, right? And then you have the addresses, you have the citation network where you can explore. This paper received 92 citations. You want to know about that, and it is a highly cited paper, right? So in the introduction, we were talking about the the ranking. So that's also an information that is available. I mentioned the ranking here. Web of Science data is used in different ranking by different ranking agencies, like Shanghai ranking in the US News, by CWTS, or by AAU. So these are ranking bodies that look at universities. And you know that rankings, they are difficult to ignore because they have their importance. Many users look at them. Families, of course, parents, they want to send their kids to the best universities, right? Of course, the definition of best university is difficult to make because you can rank institutions in many different ways. The government will look at the ranking, the ministry, or also the funding bodies. They would probably grant more money to institutions that have a better rank. Journal citation reports, just a little bit of history. If you want to look at a journal itself as an entity, you have lots of information available in the journal citation reports. Impact factor, of course, but then some data related to open access. You have data transparency, where each and every indicator is now calculated and we show how it is calculated. And now all journals in Web of Science, in ISI, have a profile in journal citation reports. They get a journal impact factor. It has been expanded in last year to all journals in the collection. So something that we highlight and we mention very often is the responsible use of metrics. Initially, journal impact factor, please, and I want to highlight this, it was not built for the evaluation of individual articles or even the evaluation of researchers. So we see that very often where institutions, research managers, they would look at, okay, this researcher have 5 papers, they are published in a journal, and those journals, they have impact factor of X, Y, or Z, right? And they use the impact factor of the journal to evaluate the researcher or the publication. And that's wrong in the sense that that indicator is a journal indicator. It is not a researcher indicator. It is not a publication or a paper indicator. So ISI has always defended that bibliometrics are not a substitute for peer review, but a good complement. If you have the opportunity to do peer review, meaning having a committee to evaluate the work of a researcher, then that's the best way to evaluate that output. Nevertheless, the bibliometrics or the scientometric indicators, they provide good complements. So this is back to 2008, 2009. A colleague from ISI, he was already advocating the use of multiple indicators and the responsible use of the JEF or journal impact factor. So this is something more recent, current literature, 2017, 2023, the use of publication and citation analysis as a complement of peer review, because it's difficult to do committees and because it takes time. So the use of publication and citation analysis to complement peer review for research evaluation. In 2023, there was also a white paper published by colleagues from ISI for recommendation, with recommendations for decision makers on published criteria, right, to offer useful metrics for research evaluation in the context of Spain, right? So lots of information about the good citation behavior. That's actually, I recommend you look at those courses. They are free courses on our website, the Web of Science Academy. And we talk about the good citation behavior, right? So how do you cite correctly? Because we've seen researchers playing the game of citations. They cite family members, colleagues, people from the university, but has nothing to do with the study. And also a course related to ethical publishing behavior, right? So this is a key message that I want to convey here. Also, as part of the responsible use of metrics, it is important to use many indicators. People, they would just look at the impact factor and they would stop there. And they would say, that's enough, right? What we talk about at Clarivate, we talk about profiles, meaning not a single metric, but different elements, different indicators that give you different perspectives about an entity, being a country or an institution or a researcher or even a journal, right? And we provide lots of different metrics that go beyond just journal citation report metrics. So, for example, for an author, we would provide data related to peer review. So if a researcher has done peer review, then the researcher can showcase that activity, which is also very, very important. Okay, the researcher could say, I published 10 papers, but I've also done the peer review of 15 papers. So that is also an activity that you might be interested in. The international collaboration with the industry. We know scientific research in the industry is very different than academic research. The open access, you might be interested in having some information about the output that comes out from your institution that is publicly available. Research people, the public, they can read the papers from your institution without having to pay for the full text or to subscribe to the journal. And when you have that, we have also indicators related to research data. Something that we see where a researcher writes a manuscript, publishes that paper, and makes the data available. So producing data is also an activity that goes beyond just publishing articles. So I have done a study, and in my study, I have statistics. It can be software, a program. It can be just an Excel file. I share this data, and this data can be reused. So the data set that I produced is also an interesting research output. Something that you'll see in Web of Science is also the context of citations. So we know where you cite someone, that citation has a context. It can be, you support, you say our results are in line with someone else's findings, or they are in contrast, they differ, we find something different, our method is better, and so on. So, and that gives you a breakdown of how a publication has been cited based on the context of citations. I talked about the funding. That's also data that you can manipulate and analyze in the database. You can track production and funding based on acknowledgement. Authorship position, very simple. We could have a look at a specific country in the region, Morocco, Algeria, all the way to Saudi Arabia, UAE, or Jordan, Lebanon, whatever the country in the region. And you look at if a country has, let's say, 100 papers, what's the proportion of these papers where the first author or the last author or the corresponding author is from the country itself? So that also gives you an idea of, okay, who's leading the research? Is the research done from our own country, or is it a collaboration where our researchers are, middle authors, or actually they're the corresponding author and they're managing the relationship or the communication with the journal, or it's the last author, where the last author in many fields, of course, in some fields like mathematics, economics, or biochemistry, the authorship position is in alphabetical order. I'm talking about fields where the authorship position has or might have a meaning, right? So this is also something that you can analyze. I'm not going through all these indicators, but just to show you, for example, you have lots of indicators, not just number of papers, number of citations, or the journal impact factor. You have lots of indicators that give you some indication about different perspectives, right? In terms of peer review, and I'll finish with that. So this is something that you'll find also in the Web of Science. So as part of the open science movement, and it is growing in the region. If you look at North America, Europe, and in some countries, the open science is something that we hear almost every day. But when we talk about open science, it's not just open access of the paper. You have different elements. Open science or open access in terms of visibility of the peer review. So you have something called transparent peer review, which is gaining traction. And you'll find that in the Web of Science, very interesting, where it improves, of course, the research integrity, but it also decreases the fraudulent peer review, where you have, okay, someone who's acting as a peer review, but the peer review activity is very poor. The peer reviewer didn't really do a great job. And also it helps to avoid manipulation of the peer review process. So you'll have something like this. That's coming from the Web of Science. I really like it. It's very powerful, where you have at the record level, you see here, open peer review, view open peer reviews, and it gives you the steps that the manuscript went through. So it went through 2 rounds. The manuscript was submitted, then first round, got a decision later. So of course, it went through a revision, the second round, but then you would see the reviewer report. So 2 reviewers who submitted their peer review, right? I'll show you how it looks like. You can filter on the left-hand side when you do a search and you say, all right, out of some papers, 406, I can have an idea of how the peer review process works in this journal. One advice that I give to young researchers is the following: have a look at how the peer review works in some journals. And there is more to come. I don't have an exact example here, but if you click on the down arrow here, you would see the comments of the peer reviewers. You will see the decision letter from the editor. You will see the author response and so on. All of this is linked. You can search for them. They're open. You can cite them, and it is integrated within the record. It is part of the publication, right? So we partner with journals where we have the visibility of the peer review and how it happened during the publication process. There is more to come for you to know. So lots of work that have been done already in the first half of 2024. For example, grants index in terms of research impact. We have AI research assistant where you can ask our assistant within the Web of Science and get some responses. But in H2, we'll have more content related to retractions, very important as well, papers that got retracted. Translated search, that would help many researchers from the region. And policy citations, that might be relevant for research councils. So if there's a policy and you want to track the citation of that policy document. And yeah, and more to come, some concepts that we are currently exploring. So there is a lot of additional resources and references. I'm not going through all of them. You'll get access to the presentation anyway. So I would like to thank you and take some time to go through the questions if any. Yeah, so okay, thanks for the confirmation on the sound. Question from Hinda. US news will be with Scopus. So I'm not sure. As far as I know, US news is still with Web of Science. So I would need to check this. And yeah, most welcome. Another question from Hinda who says if it's possible to get the PDF. So I'll share the presentation with the organizers of the webinar, and they will make sure to share it across. I don't have the list of the participants. And there was another question from Karim, who's asking about the certificate, I'm happy to generate the certificate, but I would need the details of the attendees. So yeah, that was a question earlier. Unless JustTech is managing that, so I'm not sure about the certificates of participation. All right, let me see. So that's it from my end. Yeah, I'm done with my presentation. If there is no other questions, I would like to pass back the presentation to the organizers. So I'm not sure if colleagues from JustTech, Ms. Faten, if you would like to close the session. Yeah, I'm not sure if Ibrahim or Fatan or Doctor, if you want to say a closing word. I don't see any other questions in the chat. Okay, let me see. I've seen some notification messages, so let me see. Yeah, most welcome. Thank you all for your participation. All right, so yeah, I'm not sure whether colleagues from JustTech or from the Federation of Arab Scientific Research Councils, if they want to close the session.
شكرا دكتور جمال، بارك الله فيك على كل المعلومات القيمة اللي قدمتها. والآن إذا في بعض الأسئلة من بعض الحضور يتفضلوا، وبخليك بعدين تختم السيشن يا دكتور جمال. شكرا.
شكرا. Yeah, I think there's no more questions. Well, thank you all, and welcome for anyone posting their thanks in the chat. It was a pleasure. I'll make sure that I share the presentation with the organizers, and hopefully you'll get all of you a copy of it. We'll see how we manage the certificates, because that was a question from some of you. Happy to manage that with colleagues from JustTech. And yeah, thank you all. You'll get my contact details. You can easily find me on the internet. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions. And yeah, thank you very much, everyone. I wish you all the best, and take care. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.